30s. And in this context, our Vice Chairman and Honorable Finance Minister mooted the idea of bringing together finance ministers, leaders of political parties, scholars of eminence, experienced administrators, and captains of the press to deliberate upon this issue. And that is why we are today here. And we are, in fact, harnessing the information communication technology. And I have the great pleasure and privilege of welcoming all of you to this meeting. So, since the time is limited, I'm not going to take much time, and I would like to, ideally, I should be welcoming each one of you, and ought to be welcoming. We have Siddharam Echuri, Sri Siddharam Echuri, Sri V. Raja, and we have a number of prominent academicians and people from the press. Unfortunately, given the technical constraints, we are not able to see them, and all of them would have by now logged in. And I welcome all of you with much affection and with much appreciation, and thanks to your commitment to the cause that we all stand for. And it is our hope that the deliberations will come up with tangible outcome, wherein we will be able to collectively address this pandemic by working together, because we all believe that 1 + 1 is 12, not 2. And this is an occasion, and I thank you once again. And I would like to invite Sri Badalji to chair this session and conduct the proceedings.
Well, thank you very much. My first words must be to thank Dr. Thomas Isaac for organizing this, and to the Gulati Institute as well. And if I can welcome you all, including our co-panelists, Mr. Manish Sisodia ji, Dr. Thomas Isaac, Shri Hasib Darabu Saab. How are you, sir, my old friend? Mr. Jairam Ramesh. I'm not sure whether Mr. Ajit Pawar has logged in or not, or is he coming today? But once again, to all of you and distinguished participants and people who are logged in, welcome to this. Sir, we meet in extremely challenging times where we are facing a struggle on two fronts. One is lives, and second is livelihoods. There appear to be two words, but in the long run, actually they overlap. There is no livelihood without life, and there's no life without livelihood. As a student of history, this is actually truly a world war. World War I and World War II, they were fought by maybe a dozen or 24 nations. This is the first time in human history that a war is actually being fought by about 200 nations. And we are in stage 2 of lockdown. I don't know. I mean, the Prime Minister is meeting today with some chief ministers. I don't know what they decide. But in the words, if you would allow me this indulgence, in the words of Mr. Churchill, one of the greatest wartime leaders, and to quote him, he said, "This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." So we are actually meeting in these circumstances and with very strained resources. The combined fiscal deficit of the center and states budgeted for the current financial year was about 6%. And even if we don't spend a single rupee on COVID relief, I think the fiscal deficit would be touching about 10%. And economic activity has come to a complete standstill. In Punjab, I had budgeted for 2.8 or 2.9 fiscal deficit. I think I'll be touching about 6.5% by the end of the year, some rough calculations. And many states entities and individuals may not be able to withstand the damage which has already been done. With the reputed banks actually fending for cover, it would be foolhardy for us that to believe that funds will be available for distressed sectors. It's not one or two sectors, and you have to actually spend a considerable amount of time to find out who all are distressed. It's the airlines, the hotels, automobiles, real estate, banks, NBFCs, mutual funds, oil, gas, transportation, retail, startups. They're all on the verge of collapse. And it is also, I think, 75% of MSME. We are actually facing an existence crisis. Central aid so far has been abysmal. What we have got so far is largely the freedom to borrow or front load some of the revenue. Punjab has got more than 1,000 crores of GST arrears since, still pending, over the last 3 years, apart from the compensation which was due to us. And, while I may be hoping that there would be some relaxation in fiscal deficit, but that would not mean much. So with the, I think India would require two kinds of doctors, the medical doctors, but also doctors of who would be able to solve, the crisis, the impending economic crisis. And I'm not sure whether these doctors are still in India or they have actually left India. And the job of a state finance minister is actually much more difficult than the health minister of a state. And because there is no vaccine available in finances, there is no mask where I can hide, or there could be, I can't even sanitize my hands. And yet no one seems to be prepared for this kind of mass immunization which is required. So this is a short background, and let me actually give you the outline of the discussions which will follow. We have a total of about 90 minutes. I have taken about 5 minutes out of this. Technology permitting, we can keep about 10 minutes in the end for question and answers. And if other panelists on board, we could perhaps discuss the subject under multiple heads. Let each panelist make his introductory remarks for about 5 to 6 minutes. And then we come to some specific issues. So can I start with the Deputy Chief Minister of Delhi, and we can take it up from there. So thank you very much. And can I ask Mr. Manish Sisodia Saab if he can make his introductory remarks? Thank you.
Thank you, मनप्रीत भाई. आपको सुनना बड़ा अच्छा लगता है, और हमेशा जब आप बोल रहे होते हैं तो लगता है बोलते रहें, और ये अपनी बारी तो आती रहेगी, पर बोलते रहें. आपको सुनना, जिस तरह से आप पूरी चीजों का एनालिसिस करते हैं और वर्ड बाय वर्ड आप पोएटिक और प्रोज दोनों के स्टाइल में लेके आते हैं. आई रियली अप्रिशिएट यू. Thank you very much, and I am grateful to Dr. Isaac also, who initiated this process, because of whom we are here today. We are discussing all this. We in Delhi, in national capital, we are facing COVID very badly. I mean, Maharashtra or Delhi, kuch Ahmedabad, Agra, वगैरह are the worst affected states right now. Worst affected cities and areas right now. लॉकडाउन का बहुत बुरा असर पड़ रहा है, क्योंकि दिल्ली तो टोटल कंजम्पशन बेस्ड है, मार्केट बेस्ड इकोनॉमी है. हमारी इकोनॉमी में प्रोडक्शन नहीं, ट्रेडिंग है और कंजम्पशन है. इसकी वजह से आई जस्ट गिव यू अ फिगर कि अप्रैल 2019 में दिल्ली सरकार को जो टैक्स मिला था जीएसटी से एंड वेट टोटल, it was approximately 3,500 crore rupees last year, and this year it is 323 crore. 3,500 करोड़ रुपए पिछले साल था अप्रैल में, और इस बार हमारे पास 323 करोड़ रुपए है. दिल्ली की प्रॉब्लम्स, क्योंकि आज हम जिन टॉपिक्स पे डिस्कस करेंगे उसमें दिल्ली कई जगह एक अलग तरीके का स्टेटस दिल्ली को दिया हुआ है पूरे उसमें सिस्टम में. एंड फाइनेंस कमीशन में हम लोग कवर नहीं होते. हम लोग लोन नहीं ले सकते हैं. वी कांट बोरो फ्रॉम द मार्केट. वी ओनली कैन रिक्वेस्ट गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया टू बोरो फॉर अस, एंड वी हैव रिटन टू गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया कि भाई एट प्रेजेंट जब हम सब ने बाकी राज्यों की तरह भी, बहुत सारे राज्यों की तरह हमने भी ऑर्डर किए हैं कि हम सैलरी के अलावा कहीं खर्च नहीं करेंगे, लेकिन सैलरी भी हमारे पास में 1-1.5 महीने की है। वैसे में वी नीड टू बोरो, इफ यू कैन बोरो देन यू हैव टू बोरो फॉर अस, एंड एज अ क्रेडिबल गवर्नमेंट यू कैन ट्रस्ट की पे फॉर इट। आई डोंट नो वेदर दे आर doing something or not, I'm not aware, but I personally spoke to Union Finance Minister also. So Delhi is in a different kind of situation where जो legitimate मतलब जो हमारे general resources हैं वो सबसे ज़्यादा affected state में हैं, और we really need help to understand कि how will, and I completely agree कि इसका ना कोई vaccine है ना कोई इसका, I don't know कि इसके doctors इंडिया में मिलेंगे कि बाहर से ढूंढने पड़ेंगे, but इस पूरे crisis के बीच में अभी तो पता भी नहीं कि 3 तारीख को खुलेगा कि नहीं खुलेगा, क्योंकि मार्केट नहीं खुले तो दिल्ली में सेल नहीं होनी है। पेट्रोल और वो सब तो नीचे चला ही गया है, एक्साइज तो, लेकिन सेल भी नहीं होनी है, और सेल नहीं होनी तो फिर दिल्ली को तो टैक्स नहीं मिलने वाला है। बहुत बुरी स्थिति आने वाली है। आई डोंट नो कैसे इसको हैंडल करेंगे। वी आर ऑल्सो ब्रेनस्टॉर्मिंग विद पीपल हु आर इन दिल्ली अबाउट फ्यूचर प्रोस्पेक्ट्स, बट यस वी ऑल आर एंटरिंग इनटू वेरी टफ टाइम। और अगर आज के इस डिस्कशन में कुछ दिल्ली के लिए भी, बिकॉज फाइनेंस कमीशन के बारे में जब हम बात करते हैं तो प्रॉब्लम इज की गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया हैज टेकन स्टैंड एंड दे आर नॉट अलाउइंग एट ऑल। हमारा बहुत ज्यादा वो बनता नहीं है, लेकिन इसके अलावा जो भी डिस्कशन के पॉइंट्स होंगे आई वुड लाइक टू पार्टिसिपेट, एंड मैं समझना चाहूंगा कि दिल्ली में भी कैसे हम दिल्ली के स्पेसिफिक में या ओवरऑल पूरे देश के उसमें कैसे कंट्रीब्यूट कर सकते हैं। थैंक यू, दिस वाज माय ओपनिंग रिमार्क।
Thank you, Manish ji, and thank you for your kind words. And sir, एक चीज तो अब तय है कि ये जो this crisis has to be fought not just by the governments but by the entire population. And it is sometimes in crises like this that the character of nations and character of individuals comes out. And we are collectively in this fight, and what the world is fighting with resources and money, I think people of India would have to fight with discipline and determination. मैं अपने गांव में गया मनीष जी, तो मुझे एक बड़ा देसी सा आदमी मिल गया, and he told me कि मनप्रीत, you're the finance minister, we realize that we sympathize or empathize with you, but if this could have been fought with money, he said ki then the Arabs have wells full of oil. Trump has no shortage of money. Europe has no shortage of doctors. So, this is unprecedented. There are no books, there are no solutions. So can I ask Dr. Thomas Isaac if he can give his introductory remarks, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Yesterday, I sent you an e-version of the second edition of my book, Challenges to Indian Fiscal Federalism. That will provide a kind of backdrop to the discussions that we are having. I'll just summarize those positions and take up issues for discussion later. One, we have everybody accepts India is quasi-federal. It's very true of finance. The center has the control of the revenues, most of the revenues. There's a mismatch between the revenue and expenditure of the states. And my first point is that over the post-independence period, this mismatch has become more and more acute. Just to give you one number, in 1950-51, the pre-devolution gap of the states was 2.41% of GDP. In 2015-16, it has increased to 10.01. That is the kind of mismatch that today exists. And post-devolution gap of the states, even after the Finance Commission's devolution, it has increased from 1.95% in 50-51 to 6.16% in 2015-16. Now, whatever that has happened, the realm of center-state financial relations from 1991 onwards has tended to undermine the states' rights. There are two major issues that we have got to consider. One is GST. Unfortunately, the GST, we all know, has undermined the fiscal space of the states. I'm not going to go into systematically analyze why this happened. We finance ministers have been discussing it over and over again in the GST Council, but the revenues have not been buoyant. But we have been reducing the rates on the promise that what does it matter? Your 14% is guaranteed, 14% growth. And now the central government has taken a position that we can pay you compensation. In fact, there was a solemn promise in the GST Council, as all we know, when the question was raised. In fact, the Hazim who raised the question, and you gave the answer, and finance minister, then Arun Jaitley agreed to it, that it shouldn't matter if the compensation fund doesn't have the money. We can borrow and pay the compensation and extend the cess for a year or two till the money is recouped. Okay, so this has been a very serious blow to the rights of the states. Second has been the FRBM Act. Now, FRBM has severely restricted the fiscal domain of the state. I don't need to elaborate on this to you. Now, this is the situation when the 15th Finance Commission came. And we have all discussed at length the terms of reference of the Finance Commission, which has been slated against the states. It's the first time that terms of reference was attempting to turn back on the recommendations made by the previous commission, awarding the states 42% of the central tax pool. It was a serious attempt to make the transfers to states subject to more severe conditions. And finally, in the additional terms of reference, to bring in defense as a third claimant from the divisible pool. What the center could not do directly by reducing the tax share of the states was attempted to be done indirectly by making a third claimant to the divisible pool. Now, this is unconstitutional. So, this book elaborates on each of these processes. Now the interim report, the report for 2021 of the Finance Commission has come. Our worst fears have not been realized. Okay. But there are sufficient hints in this report that the full report from next 5 years, the Finance Commission was going to consider as a review of the FRBM Act, making it more stringent, making it difficult for the states to borrow. This was a major threat that was being held out. And secondly, they were going to address the problem of financing the defense. Okay, we were concerned about this, etc., when this pandemic came, which has exposed the fragile nature of the state finances. All of a sudden, all our income has just evaporated. At Kerala, I know, our own revenue is less than 200, nearly around 200 crores, instead of the 2,500 crores. And central transfers have also declined. And as Manpreet said, only help that has been extended was that states were permitted to front load their borrowing. And I know all of you, I mean, Punjab, for example, went for a small, say, a small amount, and I think you got 7 or 8%, whatever in between. But Kerala, we couldn't do that. We were committed to a 20,000 crores package for income transfer to the people in Kerala, and we went for a 6,000 crore borrowing, and it ended up with 9% interest. Now this is terrible. Our economic growth is going to be minus, negative zone, and we are forced to borrow at 9%, and which means a surest road to kind of debt trap. So this is a very, very serious situation. I shall stop now. And this is the background in which we are bringing, say, all scholars, administrators, journalists, and of course, those finance ministers who are willing to put in their contribution to come and discuss the impact of the pandemic on the state finances. Thank you. I will respond to the issues that Manpreet would raise later.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. And I'm sure we need to collectively pool in our resources of experience and intellect to somehow overcome this challenge. Can I ask my good friend, Dr. Haseeb Drabu Sahab, if he can make his introductory remarks? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. First, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very well.
First, a comment starting from where Isaac left. I think federalism battle has changed. Now, we have been seeing over the last 20 years how globalization, economic reforms, and constitutional changes have resulted in the shrinking of fiscal space for states, which Isaac referred to. Center has been squeezing the states from top, and panchayats have been nibbling at their heels, resulting in contraction of fiscal space. But I think that's not really the design of fiscal federalism in India is not the issue today, or should not be rather the issue today. The real issue today is how the current pandemic is being used by the central government to create a new form of federalism, which I call the cannibalistic federalism. You are actually cannibalizing the states today, using the epidemic as a tool for that. But having said that about fiscal federalism, I really want to focus on the kind of situation today that we are in, because if it is left to the way it's going, we will not be concerned really about fiscal federalism or any such thing. We will be concerned about survival. The real problem, as I see, being outside government today, fortunately, is that we have to do away with binaries. There are three binaries that I see are prevalent in the national discourse today. One binary is, which Manpreet referred to, it's not about lives and livelihood. It's not lives versus livelihood. It's lives and livelihood. The second, it is not about center versus states. It is about center and states. And third binary is, it's not about a lockdown or no lockdown. Again, the chairman again referred to it fleetingly about a smart lockdown, where we need to look at these things. But I think we need to do away with these three binaries and try and find a way forward by combining these three and finding a middle ground. The fact that it's a global pandemic doesn't mean it's a universal phenomenon, where there is a one-size-fits-all solution, either globally or within the country. There are local contexts to it, and the major point that emanates from this is that states have to get flexibility in managing both in terms of policy as well as in terms of operations and also in terms of financing. So I think because it affects the state, it affects those areas which are the domain of the state governments as per the constitution. Primarily, let's say health. It is a state subject. So while there should be a certain guideline or a template, for instance, for starting off with this whole thing of how do you standardize lockdowns? It's been left to individual DMs. So you may have a particular success story emerging out of Bhilwara or a particular area, but as long as there is not a standardized manner in which lockdowns are conducted, flexibility is provided, it is going to result in a huge centralization, and consequently it will impair the efficacy of how this thing is handled. The disruptions in economic policy, in economic activity, are three. One, that today there's a lockdown and people can't go to work. Tomorrow, suppose we have to lift the lockdown and people will get to work. Will that solve the problem? I don't think so. Because the second part is there, that there's a massive supply chain disruption. So you will need to have that as one more element of policy, is how do I restore the supply chain disruptions even as I'm in lockdown? Because the lockdown is preventing people from going from one place to the other. There is a much more structural problem of a supply chain breakdown. And the third part really is that even if supply chains were restored, is there a demand? Because there's a large scale demand drop. Now, for instance, agricultural sector has opened up in a few areas in Karnataka and let's say in J&K, but there is no demand for exports. So what are you going to do with the products? Agriculture is dead today because even as I see that you can actually go to your nursery or whatever establishment or site, you're not able to sell those. So these are three layers of constraints that need to be addressed and that are not being addressed. They are not being addressed because you're looking at a 30,000 view of the situation. You're more concerned about the optics of management rather than the substantive parts of management. These will happen only when you will give states a greater flexibility because they're managing. Now, in terms of policies, I think because of the three things that I just outlined, you can look at a relief policy, a revival policy, and a recovery policy. There has been none of this. Relief, very limited, has been there. And you can look at policy initiatives which are not very grand. Two come to my mind very immediately. Now, instead of looking at starting Manrega work, which will impair again the whole health crisis, why not some states look at this, that convert Manrega into a UBI? Take last year's listings and allow them to, basically convert it into a UBI so that you actually have some cash in hand for people. Because today in this crisis, cash is the most critical thing for governments, for companies, and for individuals. How do I keep the economy liquid? How do I keep corporates liquid? How do I keep families liquid? How do I keep state governments liquid? Now, when Isaac talks about a cash crisis, he's looking at liquidity management of his own thing. I heard the chairman talk about raising fiscal deficit. I wonder how they will be financed. Where is the money going to come from? Debt markets are looking very bad. The banks are not going to lend. So where is the increase in fiscal deficit going to come from? How will it be financed? So one simple solution to my mind, which state government should raise, is to ask for an automatic increase in the ways and mean advances from the Reserve Bank of India with a 12-month period. Today, it is 5 times your cash balances converted into 20 times your cash balances. At least you will have a certain liquidity profile within your state. Second, What about doing complete public expenditure policy restructuring? All of you have presented budgets. Just stop all capex works, divert money to revenue expenditure, focusing on health and education, so that you actually are able to at least target the thing. The central government should do the same. Instead of looking at capital projects which will take 10 years or 5 years and which will involve all kinds of things, convert it into a primarily revenue budget. I would suspend the capital budget completely and allocate resources for the three most critical sectors driven by health. The other part where I find that fiscal federalism has taken a very different meaning now, a different battle altogether, is how the institutionalized networks of panchayats are not being used by the central government. It's all about the DM and the DC. What has happened to panchayats? They should be the frontline institutions for democratic response to the disaster management. This is even in the Act. They should be there. I don't find any mention of panchayats being used on the forefront of the response to disaster. Now, A, this leads to a huge centralization. B, the political engagement in a crisis gets minimized. So I think one of the reasons for this is this whole thing that the current dispensation seems to think that there are no institutions that have been created over 70 years. So one of the major points that state government should talk about is the under-leveraging of the existing institutional network that has been built over 70 years. Center has not even looked at those institutions, which are huge and powerful institutions with a huge reach. So I would imagine that the real crisis is in some ways also of not trying to see the totality of it and recognizing that there's enough institutional strength in the system to be able to respond to this effectively. And this is resulting in a very ad hoc, top-down approach driven by brownie points and optics of it rather than the substantive thing. With that, I will stop. These are my initial comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hasib. It's always enlightening to listen to you. And I really appreciated your point on under-leveraging of our institutions. And believe you me, I think, in this crisis, there are opportunities. And one opportunity which I would wish for India is to somehow repair a ruptured polity. And if we can do that, it will have a multiplier effect. Thank you very much. Can I ask Jairamji, Ramesh Saab, if you could just make your introductory remarks, sir?
Well, my session is much later. So I'm only an interloper into your session, Mantri. I have heard you, I've heard my very old friend Hasib, and I've heard Manish Sisodia ji. And to me, it seems to me that the one issue that we have to grapple with as we come out of a lockdown progressively is that the entire fiscal architecture and the political architecture of the country is going to be transformed. The last 30 years has seen decentralization to states. It has not seen the same degree of decentralization to panchayats and nagarpalikas as envisaged in the 73rd and 74th Amendment. But nevertheless, the movement has been towards political decentralization along with economic liberalization. I'm afraid economic liberalization will not be a casualty now, but political decentralization will definitely be a casualty. And I think that's, clamor for liberalizing environmental laws, the clamor for liberalizing labor laws, the clamor for liberalizing land acquisition laws will intensify with the pressure to revive the economy. But I think the real danger is that we are going to go back into a centralized polity mode. And I think people like you, Manpreet, Thomas Isaac, Manish Sisodia ji, Harseep Rabu, and all other finance ministers, my good friend Amit Mitra and others, must really put your heads together. The 15th Finance Commission, I have always said from the beginning, it was a political exercise. Uh, and it's now going to be even more political than before. This is what really bothers me, that we are now, the architecture is going to completely change, and the central government is going to go back to being all powerful, politically, administratively, as well as fiscally. And I think that's what we really should be bothered about as we progressively get out of the crisis. And I think one collective demand that the states should be making is that a revised budget should be presented by the central government sometime in mid-July, because clearly the budget of February 1st, 2020, has been made completely irrelevant by the events of the last few weeks. These are my comments for the time being, Manpreet.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And I think this is one thing which we can take from here, that a separate COVID budget, both by the central government and maybe even by the states, sir. All the center and the states can actually go in for a fresh budget, which will then, and because then the sanctity of the old budget, which I read about 5 weeks back, doesn't exist anymore. Sir, can I be a little selfish? And there are many issues which have come up, which we need to discuss. But something which concerns me as a small finance minister from a very small state, and if I can put it to all the panelists, is it prudent to raise taxes when we need to actually address demand? And nearly half of the state tax is now GST for all practical purposes. It's controlled by the center. I doubt that we can even expect 6 months of compensation out of the compensation fronts. Crude prices are down. Demand is practically absent at this stage. What is the scope for raising taxes on petroleum? Number one. And the situation in the real estate vehicle taxes better. Can we turn to non-tax revenues? When practically every country has announced relief in taxes, it will be applying salt to the wounds if we raise taxes. So can I ask the panelists if we can address this question, because this is something which is coming up in the States, that can we raise tax on petroleum? Can we, somehow non-tax revenues? Would it be prudent? Can I start with Manish ji? If Manish ji, आप इस पे कोई comment करना चाहेंगे जी? कोई tax बढ़ाने की कोई scope, कोई गुंजाइश है जी?
अभी तो क्योंकि देखिए टैक्स हटने की जब हम सोचेंगे तो कहीं ना कहीं हम किसी गवर्नमेंट के पॉकेट्स के बारे में सोचेंगे, हम खर्चा कैसे अपने प्लान पे और नॉन प्लान पे कैसे करेंगे। लेकिन प्रॉब्लम यह है कि जिन लोगों से टैक्स लेंगे उनकी हालत भी बहुत खराब है, जिन लोगों से हम टैक्स लेने की बात सोच रहे हैं, मतलब लेते हैं, तो वहाँ अभी जॉब्स नहीं है, प्रॉफिट्स नहीं है। वैसे में इंडस्ट्री मार्केट अपेक्षा रख रहा है कि क्या सरकार हमें कुछ और टैक्स रिबेट्स देगी ताकि मार्केट बूम करे, ताकि मार्केट को थोड़ा आगे बढ़ने में मदद की जा सके। तो आई डाउट कि इस ऐसे समय में टैक्स बढ़ाने का फैसला लिया जा सकता है, कोई टैक्स रेट्स आगे बढ़ाने का। दैट अप्लाइज टू पेट्रोलियम आल्सो। नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यूज में एज आई सेड कि हम लोग डिस्कस भी कर रहे हैं कि बोरोइंग इज वन ऑफ द मेजर्स, बट बोरोइंग हैज इट्स ओन लिमिट्स एंड इट्स ओन डिमेरिट्स। पूरी की पूरी इकोनॉमी को रीथिंक करना पड़ेगा। जैसे आपने पूरे बजट के लिए बोला ना, मुझे लगता है सारे के सारे इकोनॉमी को सबको, आप सब लोग बहुत एक्सपीरियंस्ड लोग हैं, जयराम भाई जैसे लोग जो पूरी इकोनॉमी को, इस देश की इकोनॉमी को बहुत अच्छे से समझते रहे बैठे हैं। मुझे लगता है टैक्स बढ़ाने वाला फॉर्मूला तो काम कर नहीं पाएगा। इन प्रिंसिपल अंदर से आएगा, क्योंकि जिससे हम कहेंगे भाई टैक्स देना है वो अपेक्षा रख रहे हैं कि आप 4 रुपए की जगह 3.5 रुपए कर सकते हो क्या, और हम सोचेंगे कि हम 4 रुपए की जगह 4.5 रुपए क्या. So I think it would be unfair for him also, and ultimately to people whom we are here to serve. उनके बिहाफ पे भी अनफेयर होगा कि अगर हम बोले हम टैक्स बढ़ाना चाहते हैं बिकॉज गवर्नमेंट. बट व्हाट आर द अदर मीन्स, आई हैव नो क्लू, आई हैव नो आइडिया व्हाट कैन बी.
Dr. Thomas, any chance of state trying to augment its revenues by tax collection?
Badalji, the issue raised is very, very relevant. The budgets, both of the center and states, have been made irrelevant by the changes in the economic situation. Now, for the center, this is the second time it is happening. The first interim budget, within weeks of the presentation passing of the budget, you need to have a mini budget and 3 mini budgets. Here, take the case of the present budget. There was not even reference to slow down, and therefore did not address at all the demand collapse that was happening in India. Therefore, this budget was irrelevant even before pandemic. Now, pandemic has made it totally irrelevant. Now, when we think, I accept what Jairam Rameshji said, better think of a new budget. Now, when we think of a new budget, the first issue is how do you raise revenue? I think it is no good idea to play with tax rates. Today, the Business Standard and I think Economic Times carry 2 reports. One arguing that central government is thinking of raising the taxes, other speculating the center is going to reduce the taxes. Now, reduction in the tax means raising the tax is clearly out. Don't think of doing that now. But reducing the taxes, tell me, 1,75,000 crores of taxes, corporate taxes were cut. Now, what has been the outcome? Has the investment responded? Only thing that happened was that profits have increased, share prices increased, and cash balance increased in the hands of the companies. Therefore, tax as an instrument to influence the macroeconomic situation, this possibility is nil. But then the question rises, how do you finance? Now that's where what Hasib's comments become important. Now Hasib said about the ways and means being increased. That's not going to solve Hasib. That is inadequate. I know Bank of England, for example, has agreed they will provide unlimited, without limit, ways and means accommodation to the government. Now they have increased the ways and means and overdraft facility by 60%. It's a paltry increase here. It does not contribute anything to the kind of gap that exists between the revenue and expenditure of the state governments. And therefore, I agree with you, increase the ways and means, but not enough. Increase the fiscal deficit ceiling to 5% and allow the states to monetize the debt. Now, there is a report from N.K. Singh, Finance Commission Chairman, where he said the present law does not permit, therefore, states should now amend to have an escape clause. It's not escape clause. It's unusual times, and you need this extraordinary different actions. If necessary, let the pandemic borrowing be above this 3%. Let there be a pandemic bond which a new window opened by the Reserve Bank. Now, monetizing the debt, it does not affect the price. The prices are crashing here. Only reason price in India is not crashing is that you are not transferring the reduction in the international crude oil prices to the consumers. Now, you do that if you want to reduce anything. You reduce the tax on petrol and diesel and so on. Allow the prices to be, so prices will be low. You have food grains, you have a good foreign exchange reserve. There was a totally, I don't know why, Ramesh ji, nobody in Delhi has raised this question. India government voted against creation of 500 billion SDRs. India would have got something like 1 lakh crores worth SDRs in foreign exchange. It doesn't have to be paid back. In fact, India should be demanding not 500 billion, but 2 trillion SDRs should be done. It should be created by the IMF. I can understand Trump vetoing it. But what is the rationale of India government going and joining Trump to stop creation of other SDRs? See, 102 nations have approached IMF for aid, emergency aid. 25 already have been given, poorest of the countries. And they get $0.4 billion. If this 500 billion SDR creation was accepted, these poorest of the countries would have received 0.8 billion, double the amount, free, without the conditions, without interest. No, 0.005% interest. See, therefore, India government has to give up this obsession with rules which were created some other time. What is the sanctity of 3% here? Look at what other countries are doing. And therefore, I am against all tinkering with taxes.
I'm so glad.
But reduce Badal, I think you'll have no choice. It's sticky downwards. You can't raise it up again. That we have experienced in the GST Council. So leave the taxes now for the time being. Anyway, no tax is being collected because there is no sale take place. Only way of financing the budget is to monetize the debt, and nothing in the country is going to happen because it is done. I think we should take a united stand on this.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
On a lighter note, Manpreet, I'm so happy that in 1991, the opposition to Dr. Manmohan Singh going to the IMF was led by Jyoti Basu, Ashok Mitra, Ashim Dasgupta, and many others of the ideological brotherhood of Thomas Isaac. I'm so happy that in 2020, Thomas Isaac is holding the flag of the IMF.
In a serious way, let me respond to what you said. Look, you read Stiglitz now. You read Stiglitz, the globalization and discontents and what he says about IMF and then managers of IMF, and read what he's writing now. Even IMF has been frightened by the pandemic to change its stance. And why should I stick on to the position I held in 1991?
Thank you, Dr. Isaac.
As we are talking about tax reduction, I'm getting news on my mobile. Central government has given some tips to some media houses that GST में राहत पैकेज देने का विचार कर रही है सरकार. एविएशन और रेस्टोरेंट सेक्टर्स को मिल सकती है राहत, हॉस्पिटल सेक्टर को राहत मिलेगी, 6 महीने तक जीएसटी ना चुकाने की छूट हो सकती है, रियल एस्टेट के लिए जीएसटी लगाया जा सकता है. So all these things they are planting or maybe thinking now. Thinking. So we have
मनीष जी, सरकार की जो पॉलिसी है मैनेज द इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस बाय हेडलाइन, अगर आप विचारों के आंकड़े सब टोटल करें तो पैकेज 6 लाख 7 लाख करोड़ आएगा. और ये विचार तो कभी एक्शन में बदलता नहीं है, विचार ही होते रहते हैं.
No, that's fine. But what they are thinking, because you know what they do is they test the idea now before GST Council. They are testing this idea to on these lines.
Thank you. Dr. Hasib, do you have any comments on the question which we are discussing about raising revenues for the state, or should we go to the next question?
I just quickly, this is really the core of the whole issue. there are friends here, let me just kind of tell Isaac that if the route that you're proposing to take, or the sense I get, you are headed towards the declaration of a financial emergency, and that is the end of state finances in totality. So traverse this path very, very carefully. Because if that's the one thing that is going to happen, that will be the end of fiscal federalism and of state finances. So let's not push things in that direction. That is one broad comment I wanted to make. Second, let us also look at separating the issues. There is one, the current short-term, here and now issue of financing, which is a WMA facility. It doesn't replace funding. So let's split the problem into, because these are existential problems today. You have a financing issue and a funding problem. Let us separate them. We can look at certainly some fund issues. When I said WMA, it was done to alleviate the current liquidity problem that is being faced by everybody. So having said that, looking at it, that I would not advise a COVID budget or a fresh budget. I would seek just one enabling thing that within what has been approved by the legislatures or by the parliament, the total level of expenditure, reallocations can be done at the level of the governments, with the state the finance minister. Isaac can do it for Kerala, Mr. Badal can do it for Punjab, the way he wants to restructure expenditures without getting into a legislative approval. I think that is enough to see you over for the next 6-8 months, because the moment you get into raising issues like monetization of the state debts and all that, you are headed towards a you are giving enough grounds for a declaration of financial emergency. You can certainly seek an increase, a 1% increase in the FRBM limits from 3 to 4% or 5%. Do not get into fundings of the kind monetization of state debts, because that will be difficult. Which is why I initially also raised the issue that you can raise fiscal deficit as a level, but how will you fund it? There will be issues because it has other complications also. Interest rates will become a big thing. I do not see, this is a phase for fiscal expansion. I don't see where tax raising of taxes comes in. If anything, there is bound to be a stimulus package. Reductions in GST will happen, that Susurya is just talking about. That thinking is happening. I'm aware of that there is some thinking going on, because the central government is seeing it as a 2-year phase. It's not possible to do it without a thing on it. Where the real story will lie is to create a corpus, a fund jointly between center and states, funded by leveraging the foreign exchange reserves. Instead of now going to IMF at this point of time, and then getting explored. But I would look at the existing unproductive use of forex reserves. How do I leverage that for a 3-year period? Because at the end of the day, there are no free lunches. You will only defer liabilities. The idea, economic policy design should be to postpone the liabilities to a point where economic activity can start. So a 2-year framework, to my mind, 2+ is the right thing. Because for the next 2 years, lockdown will continue in some form or the other. And you will have sectors in great distress. You cannot think of raising taxes, because the current crisis will now become a retail crisis, which will have an impact on banks. My biggest worry really is that from now on, you will see the fragility of the economic system in terms of the collapse of the banking sector. You have already seen what's happened. And look at the corporates. I mean, the kind of mess they're in. A VLCC, very large crude carrier ship, which command a price of $300,000 a day, is today selling at $1,000. Where are those kind of activities going to get funded from? So to respond to specifically to the question, fiscal expansion required, increase the FRBM limit from 3 to 4 or 4 to 5, whichever way it is thing. Don't look at even think of a tax rate. Don't even go to the route of monetizing state debts. That will cause fiscal emergency. Look at leveraging the forex reserves to present a stimulus package which has a time horizon of 3 years. Thank you.
Can I ask Hasib a question?
Go ahead, sir.
Hasib, I want to ask you a question. a government that announced demonetization, do you think that that the present conditions, declaration of a financial emergency is an option that could well be considered by this government?
That is my biggest worry, Jairam. What your centralization will happen through that route. My only concern is, really speaking, is don't actually kind of start asking things that will justify the financial emergency.
Yeah, I agree with you. By the way, that
because the moment and Jairam, the kind constitutional powers and the financial emergency, you will ride roughshod over every state government.
Yeah.
And given the kind of desire for this whole, the new political narrative, it will be a godsend opportunity. All I am advising as a friend to Isaac really is navigate this thing very, very carefully. Try and find a path which doesn't give the reasons for declaration of financial emergency, because that is the end of the story.
Absolutely right. Asif is right. I think this is one bad idea that should be rejected outright. Attempts to bring in a financial emergency. This situation can be met by mutual consultation with states and center without any emergency powers to the center. There is no need whatsoever. There are solutions possible.
I think we should be clear.
Without thinking that,
You should be clear
already
and categorical.
authoritarian. Yeah, I know. The question, you didn't mean that. You didn't. I know you don't agree with it.
You have to be clearly and categorically against it.
Can I, with your permission, move to the other option then, which is actually pruning expenditure, which has its own implications. Wasteful expenditure, of course, can be cut, but there are limits even to that. And even if I cut this down to zero, at best I'll be doing about 15 to 20% of the total projected deficit. Now, some states have actually cut or deferred salaries of the employees. A view prevails in quarters that government salaries can only be cut during financial emergency. There's a contrary view that salaries can be cut with legislative action, but emergency helps to cut them with executive instructions. I should like to hear all the panelists about the scope of pruning expenditure, and especially about salaries with the government employees. So can I ask Manish ji, agar aap shuru karna chahein? Because I read that Dr. Thomas Isaac has been able to cut salaries of all government and PSU employees from Kerala, but I'm not sure.
Let's hear Dr. Thomas first, and then maybe needed I'll.
Okay, Dr. Thomas, about pruning salaries of government employees. Can it be done with legislative action?
We are opposed to cutting the salaries. Therefore, what Kerala has done is, we have deferred the payment for a time. Let's say 5 days a year, per month. That will be paid later. It's a timing of repayment, etc. We will decide depending upon the situation. This is simply because my revenue, including the central transfers, cannot meet the salary demand. Required salaries are something like 2,500, not include pension. My total revenue, including central transfers, is 2,000 crores. So, what has been requested from the employees is that we will postpone 5 days' salary to a better time. So, this is not cut and absorb. It will be just postponement, deferment.
Postpone for how long, sir?
It will have to depend. I don't know. Suppose this is a short comeback, short depression and coming back, say by July, then by the time we can think of that. But suppose this is going to be prolonged to the whole year, what do you do? So that's a kind of flexibility they are taking. In fact, it's a bad idea to cut the salaries in times of recession. That you cut it, that much aggregate demand reduction takes place. But anyway, what we have done is this reduction is almost entirely passed on as income transfer. Um, every family, about about 60 lakh families, that will come to say something like 60% of our population, households, they have income transferred to them from 8,500 to minimum 1,000 rupees. So this is entirely used as an income transfer, and this is where we have financed this income transfer. Therefore, I would never argue for it. It should be avoided if possible. But in these circumstances, there is no other option but to defer a part of it.
Sir, if you promise not to laugh at me, in the American Civil War and even in the First World War, soldiers, because the governments had no money to pay soldiers, so they were given these interest-free bonds, which were redeemable after 2 years or 3 years. So when you say that, by July, would bonds be a solution? But don't laugh at me, Manish ji.
No.
डॉक्टर थॉमस, एक चीज और मैं पूछना चाहता था. ये सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट हैज डिसाइडेड टू stop this DA. So what are the states doing? I'm not aware, because they have decided to cut the DA till July, I think. So are you implementing that also, in that copying that also? Or maybe Punjab?
Sir, I was reading in the press today that UP has followed the government of India. So far, sir, we are meeting, our cabinet meeting is the 29th, and we'll be discussing the finances. So maybe after the 29th, I'll be able to give you a clearer picture, sir.
Salary is one part that we all are worried, and other than this, because salary is salary, but ultimately governments are not just to pay salaries. People expect a lot of things from us, including welfare to development to education and all. So definitely, as Jairam ji said, and many of us endorsed that it's time to revisit our whole budget. 3 महीने पहले, जो 2 महीने पहले हम लोगों ने बजट बनाया था, उसमें बहुत सारी चीजें कैपिटल के लिए, बहुत सारी चीजें इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के लिए रखी. I think everything need to be put on hold, considering the availability of fund. Salaries तो मुझे लगता है फिर भी निकल आएंगी, लेकिन बाकी चीजें मतलब निकल आएंगी इन सेंस, ये जो केरल से भी आइडिया मिला, और we all are discussing new ways. लेकिन जितने कैपिटल रिलेटेड काम थे या वेलफेयर स्कीम्स को आगे चलाना, उनमें कितना कट करना पड़ेगा ये क्राइसिस का समय. तो रियली and the problem is कि nobody knows कि ये कहाँ तक चलेगा, because अभी पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट बंद है, अभी एयर ट्रेवल, रेल ट्रेवल, बस ट्रेवल सब बंद है. तो ऐसे में, और unless this opens, you can't open the market. Especially Delhi type of market can't be opened unless these transports are open. छोटी मोटी आसपास की दुकानों को खोलने से कुछ होगा नहीं. फैक्ट्रियां है नहीं कि जिनको हम कह लीजिए फैक्ट्रियों में मजदूरों को लगा के काम शुरू.
Manish ji, I just wanted to re-emphasize one thing. Revisiting and presenting fresh budgets is the ground for declaration of financial emergency. ये आप एक बार सोच लीजिए. Rest, this is by way of something that I'm very, very concerned about. Both Jairam and Isaac, of course, have mentioned this, but this is something that I would want everybody, particularly friend finance ministers, which includes Isaac and you and Manpreet, look at a revised budget, force the central government to present, as Jairam is suggesting, because they will invoke financial emergency on that ground. Having said that, quick response to Manpreet's comments on expenditure management, I think the basic guiding principle for state finance ministers should be to defer payouts right now. Survive. It's not a July game, sir. It is a 2-year game. The recovery will not be a V recovery, it will be a U-shaped recovery. Please be sure of that. Right now, expenditure needs to be deferred. The payouts need to be deferred. First of all, what I would do is put a freeze on the capex budget. Just cut it out. It doesn't matter. increase transfer payments through welfare schemes, whichever way you want to do it, cut the capex budget, just put it on hold, number one. Number two, impound the DA, make forced savings. It must be done. Government servants are privileged. They have no loss of incomes happening. They can survive for the next 3 years. Impound the DA, put it in freeze, make it a forced saving, utilize it. कोई तकलीफ नहीं है, 3 साल बाद मिलेगा. You may want to do it's not Manpreet, a reference to your bond thing. I think it's not a laughable issue. You can look at a non-interest bearing liability, which can be done. The Reserve Bank of India does do it. They issue non-redeemable, non-interest bearing securities. So you can do a non-interest bearing, non-redeemable security for a period of 3 years. So it is within the powers of the government. The legislative powers do allow you to do that. So it's not laughable. It's something that can be executionable. Impound the DA, put it into your GFs, and let it be a part of the GP fund, which has a own logic of getting drawn out in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, as and when the GP fund happens. Put the impounded DA into GP. You will have increased liabilities, but that's okay. Future liabilities. Third real part would be to defer interest payments, starting with central government. Whatever interest liabilities are, you defer them. And you can't defer to banks. You can do 6 months because I'm not sure if the RBI thing applies. That's a clarification that you might like to seek. That is the RBI moratorium for 6 months, including for sub-sovereign governments like the state governments. If they are, by all means, invoke that. That you are getting 6 months, 3 months right now. It will go to 6 months. I think it will go to a year also. So you at least reduce those outgoes and make sure that the burden doesn't come after 8 months, but the tenure of the loan is elongated. So the EMI, so to say, will actually help you tide over this thing. And finally, whatever you save in terms of capex and all that, I don't think, expenditures that what I call whatever these expenditures, frivolous expenditures or unnecessary expenditures will be more than 2 to 3%, 4% or 5%. That's not going to solve the problem. Of course, they'll be cut, but kind of just freeze the capex, impound the DA, defer the interest payments, increase transfer payments is what the expenditure strategy of a sensible state government would be. Thanks.
And just one comment, Balji, regarding a question. Better than bonds, I think simple, straightforward way would be to defer the DA or the share of the salary into PF. You can do with a lock-in period of a year, or you can say no, they are free to borrow. So people who are in need of money can borrow from the PF. So simple way would be
GPF में डाल दो.
deferred.
Then you also have a logic. It gets drawn as and when there's need.
Into the PF. Into the PF. Hasib, you just said that, no?
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm saying, that it has, you see, that way you don't have a defined period. My need is different from your need. I will withdraw the GP fund at a time when I want it, right? And it is also my forced saving. So it doesn't hurt him in the long run, because he also needs to understand this, na? So don't see this again as a policy that is to be either or. It's within your powers as a routine matter. Just impound the DA, put it to GPF, and what critically matters is that your rate of retirement is lower than your rate of recruitment. So you will actually see a very long period.
Hazib, let me remind you, what the central government done is not what you said.
Absolutely, they have not done it.
They are not going to give
done a
the additional DF.
Isaac, they have just done a one-time saving of this thing, because when they do the DA restoration, it's a 3-month saving. Once they restore the DA, it will be not with backdate, but the calculations will be from that point. So it's a one-time saving, not a DA impounding. What I'm suggesting is a DA impounding, put it into GPF, because the most important part is your withdrawals will be phased, staggered over the next 20 years. So the fresh entrance GPF will be required only when his daughter is getting married, or when whatever son is getting married, or he has something. So you actually create a lot of buffer for yourself to manage that. And you could get into on lending at desirable rates. So it's you can actually manage it.
Sir, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, if you would like to come in, anything?
We have.
I think we have short over time.
Yeah.
I think we have another 2 minutes.
We have some questions from the people who participating online. A number of questions.
But there won't be time to answer them.
All the
What I
questions.
would propose is,
Yeah.
I don't know if you are free to join. We'll take all these questions at the end of the day. The people who have raised questions
There are
come
a lot of
online, and we will address them. Otherwise, because there are 100 questions now.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
So unless
So,
the chair has certain issue to be discussed further,
I would suggest that if all these questions could be collated and then answered at the end of the day, if I can then in that case ask each of the panelists if you can sum up in 2-3 minutes, and if you could end on that note, or if Dr. Thomas Isaac has any question which he would want to put up, which I have not been able to.
So I would start summing up. Perhaps you will complete the summing up. One, there is no solution other than India government or the state governments directly borrowing from the RBI and raising this fiscal ceiling, fiscal deficit ceiling. One. Two, pay the compensation, GST compensation. Three, central devolution is going to decline. Therefore, provide a special COVID grant. And I'm just repeating what Honorable Chief Minister of Punjab wrote to the Prime Minister. In fact, we are full support of your position. And therefore, I think these are three issues. And okay, we can also demand that allocation for NHM should be dramatically increased. That this paltry amount of 15,000 crores of only half will be distributed this year, rest over 3 years. What are they thinking about the economic situation of the country? And therefore, these can be a kind of common minimum platform. Where I think every finance minister will try to persuade them to write privately, individually, let me collectively, individually, make the demand around this position. Yes, Rameshji.
There is an additional point, number 5, which is a ruthless review of capital expenditure. Because a large part of the capital expenditure, as Hasib says, can in fact be deferred. And that will provide you immediate relief.
But Rameshji, I have some reservation on that. Let me tell you, Hasib may want to respond. Hasib, the capital expenditure that we are locating now, or giving administrative sanction, will come to payment only 2 years, 3 years later. Now you can't cut capital expenditure because you are now paying the bills which have already been completed. Therefore, there is a limit to cutting the capital expenditure. Whatever new administrative sanction that you are giving now, it creates a buoyancy in the spirit, animal spirits. They raise this amount, but the payment comes much later. And the bills that are pending now, there is no option. You have to pay it, and your allocation from the budget for the capital expenditure is only for the bills pending.
Isaac, a couple of things, because this is an important operational issue. There are two parts to your capex story. One is the liabilities that exist in your treasuries. Most state governments have these liabilities. They should be cleared, because that is one excellent way of actually putting money into businesses. Otherwise, their CC limits with banks have breached and they are not able to perform. So one thing I would do, and I saw this for J&K government, I wrote to them about how they should do this. They had about 4,000 crores of liabilities, past pending liabilities. So one basic decision should be, which will effectively mean increasing the flow to businesses, is to use the opportunity to clear the liabilities. Why I'm talking of capex being frozen, you can go ahead and start the thing, is that every capex that you do is funded. Tied to it is a certain resource which you can utilize. I am not saying that you stop your work. What I'm saying is that tied to a capex project is a certain funding. whether it is from NABARD, it is from LIC, it is from REC, wherever it is. If you don't do the CapEx, that funding will not be accessible to you. What I'm saying is allow that resource to be used for transfer payments which you are urgent and need. Transfer payments in the form of transfer of incomes, which you are doing in Kerala, but other states are not doing. You have done that one thing I read about, income transfer schemes. Fund that income transfer scheme from the point of this one. Second is very, very important point, which you referred to, is what will happen in the next 3 to 4 months is that your devolution will drop. This is not new. It has always happened. Whenever center could not meet its targets, the devolution will fall. You as finance minister build your budget on the assumption of a devolution. That is not going to flow to you. Now, the solution for this is not a COVID grant to my mind, because where will they get the money from? The solution, at least to make yourself very insulated from these troubles, is to seek a minimum guaranteed devolution for this year. What will that be? And you start working backwards to your budget. Once you see the gap there, then you can look at how that gets funded. Because if you now do a COVID grant, it is an additional thing that will be written out by the central government. I am pretty sure of it. I also I believe that that this FRBM ceiling will be raised to 5%. How much that will save your thing is we will be saying. But really, in terms of protecting the sanctity of your budget and your operations, what you need is to ensure a minimum guaranteed devolution in consultation with the state. Maybe the GST Council can be used, because all finances are there, is to agree to a devolution figure that this is the minimum guaranteed devolution. No, and how you fund it is your problem, not mine. After you see the establish a gap, because they will also come back to you and say this is what we can agree to on minimum guarantee basis. Then the gap is what can be looked at being funded through various means, including, as I said earlier, a non-redeemable, non-interest-bearing security from the Reserve Bank of India against that, and postpone these to see when the economic activity is revived. So let us also frame these policy initiatives in a doable manner, rather than just saying, now give me a COVID grant, and they'll come back and say we have no money. And also the loss of devolution will come from what today was just saying, that once GST goes down, if they take a view on GST cuts, will they take a view on your behalf also 9% of state GSTs, or will it only be central GST? So those are general issues that need to be discussed in the GST Council.
Manish ji, will you like to give your closing remarks?
It was a very enriching session, because we all are, and most of us are clueless about the scale and curve of the you can say spike of the problem, and the solutions also are clueless on solutions also. So many of the things that were shared were very important for us, all of us, and I think सारे discussion से कुछ ideas निकलेंगे जो शायद हम कर पाएंगे. Thank you very much for making me part of this, and this was very important for me.
Thank you very much, Manish ji. आप आए और अच्छा लगा, and Godspeed, and God bless. I hope this is the time for you also, and all of us to make those contributions. One could have actually great leaders emerge out of these crises, and I'm sure we shouldn't forget that opportunities be niklengi ji, and out of this crisis, and it's possible to make a virtue out of necessity. Mr. Jairam Ramesh, would you like to give your closing remarks, sir?
No, I think I will. I'm saying hello to Sitaram and move on to the next session. But Manpreet, I think the suggestions that you have made, and Manish ji have made, and Hasib and Thomas Isaac have made, I think needs to be collectively deliberated upon by state finance ministers. And very quickly, we need to be presenting alternatives, and not just wait for the center to come up with its moves, because I frankly have little of the center coming up with something that will actually bring about a substantial transformation in the situation. I think the initiative really lies with all of you.
Thank you, sir. So I guess this is a situation where we'll have to cross the bridges as they come, and there are going to be many bridges which we will when we go further. So I only hope that the economic activity would open soon, and the impact would not be, as long as some of our fearing. Once again, Government of Kerala, Dr. Thomas Isaac, and the Gulati Institute. So thank you very much for taking this initiative. This was really enlightening. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think I would normally in the ordinary seminars when we have such prominent personalities like finance ministers or even otherwise, we close the sessions with a photograph. Unfortunately, we cannot do it now, but we assume that your photograph is taken to our minds and hearts. And we thank you, first of all. Must say that I have something like 5 pages full of questions to the panelists because you have conducted the session in such a magnificent manner that provoked people that in turn raised these questions, and these questions will be coming to you, and also we will be trying to answer these questions at the end of the session. So to begin with, let me thank sincerely Badalji for joining, and I think you could not have conducted the session more eminently than what you have done. And I'm especially thankful to Manish Sodiaji. And I know that you are all too busy, and the PM is having the video conferencing and all. And of course, my old friend and my classmate, Asif Drabu, and Jairam Rameshji, special thanks to you. You may remember how when I first introduced Asif Drabu in your room in 87. So I'm very happy that, and there are a lot of private remarks coming through the chat to both of you. And naturally, and finally, to my chairman, Professor Thomas Isaac. And as I said, it is he who steered the whole thing in a week's time, basically 10 days. Thank you very much. And all the more importantly, we thank sincerely all those who are online now, and we wish and we would like you to continue to be there and provide you with your feedback, and that is what is going to drive us. And finally, HUDG, thank you very much. And I thank all those who worked behind with our chairperson. We have Gulsar Singh ji, Dr. Arora, and Mr. Bhatt with Sisodia, and others. Thank you very much. And I think I have not missed anyone. And all those who participated from the auditorium here. And all of you have a wonderful day. And I hope all of you will join the session whenever you are able to. Thank you very much.
So only one announcement. All these questions will be classified. The parents wants to join at 7 o'clock. They're welcome.
Yeah.
We will be responding to all the questions.
6 o'clock.
Questions anyway will be sent to you. Thank you.
Okay, no tea.